Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I hope you're having a good conference so far. It's really great to be back together at Engage after such a long break. It feels like it's just a black hole of time. And so I can hardly believe how long it's been, but it's great. And so I hope you've been having a great week too. So let me introduce myself. I'm Alexis Allen, and I'm a Claris partner with over 25 years of experience designing and developing FileMaker databases. And I design and develop custom apps for my own clients, but I also do UI design sometimes for other FileMaker teams where they do the development and I'm doing design. And I specialize in helping developers like all of you learn how to work with UI UX design principles, because I really want you to be able to help your clients make the most of their investment in custom software, and I believe design has the power to do that. So some of you are asking where I'm from. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And you can see here the iconic CN Tower and what used to be known as Sky Dome, but is the Rogers Center. I think it's actually been the Rogers Center for like 20 years, but I guess I'm old now and it's hard for me to remember. They keep renaming all of the major landmarks. Some company comes on and I can't remember what they are. So I actually took this photo last summer because my husband and I bought a sailboat. Our kids are gone to university, and so we're like, what are we doing? So it's our new project. And I'd actually never been in the harbor on my own boat. Usually if you take the ferry to the islands, you go across, it's a giant boat. This was super fun. And we happened to be there on the weekend when the world's largest rubber duck was visiting. It's 60 feet tall. It's 15.5 tons. It's an inflatable rubber duck. And, it's just silly. But I really love it because it kind of reflects who I am. I like to be practical and useful and serious sometimes, but I also like to have a bit of fun while we're doing it. I've spoken numerous times at different events on the topic of UI UX design at former DEF CONs, at FM Guru events in Italy, and at CQDF in Montreal. I'll be going back there in June. And I'm also the founder of fmdesignuniversity.com. On my website, you can find articles about FileMaker design topics. I have some free resources to help you make sense of UI UX design. And I have a signature on-demand course, which is called the Workflow Design Workshop. And I also run a live version of that workshop a few times a year. There's going to be one coming up in the spring. So if you want to download something from my website, you'll end up on the list and then you'll get notified. I've also done team training as well. So I've trained the teams at Keologic and also Goya and a few others as well. So that's also something that I do. So here are a few screenshots of projects that I've worked on for different clients. And one of the best compliments I can get is that it doesn't look like FileMaker. It just looks like an app. It just looks like something you might download from the App Store. So I actually made something for all of you. So this is my first theme file that I'm offering for sale. And a lot of students that I've talked to who took my course, they find it hard to build a UI right from scratch. They're overwhelmed by color. There's a lot of design decisions. So I decided to create a theme, but then I didn't want to just create a theme with a bunch of random objects in it and leave it up to you to figure out how to put them all together. So I went down a rabbit hole and I said, all right, well, I'm going to create a small app and it's going to have the themes in it. But that way you'll have a model of how it could look. And of course, you can do whatever you want with this, but you've got a little app there and it's got all the scripting in it. And you can either use it as a basis for your own solution, or you can just use it as a reference to see how I did things. So there's a QR code here. If you want to take a photo, you don't have to go there now, but you can take a photo for reference for later. And it contains dozens of coordinated styles. It's all FileMaker native functionality. So there's nothing wrong with using JavaScript for visualization and all that stuff. But because it's a FileMaker theme, I just wanted to focus on FileMaker native, what you can do with native FileMaker. And it's a completely unlocked file. You can see how the components are built and you can adapt it. So before I get into the presentation, I have a really quick question for all of you. So who here enjoys cooking meals at home? Oh, good number of you. That's great. Okay, cool. And who enjoys going out to a fine restaurant, like on a special occasion, going out gourmet meal? Actually, fewer of you. That's surprising. Okay.
They're expensive in LA.
Yeah. Well, cooking at home is great, right? You've got fresh ingredients. You can control what goes into your food. If you want it to have less sugar, less salt, or whatever it is. And provided you don't have picky eaters like I did, you have the pleasure of people enjoying what you've made. And so I enjoy cooking at home. But having a meal prepared for you at a fine restaurant, especially let's say a Michelin star restaurant, right? It's a different experience. So part of it is the ambiance. So part of it is, the location and the decor and the server, all of that stuff. But if we just look at the difference in like how we prepare the food from home and from a fine meal, what is the difference between that just from the food itself? So it's really the care and attention that the chef is using to prepare the meal. They have specialized knowledge of how ingredients, go together, how to prepare ingredients. They have techniques that I don't know as myself as a home cook, and the quality and the number of ingredients. So you're probably seeing the metaphor coming. This is kind of like creating apps, right? So if you want to create an elevated experience that makes people go, wow, it's really about paying attention to those details that will help you create something of lasting quality. So today I'm going to talk about, let me go back. Itchy finger. So today I'm going to talk about themes and styles, but from a developer's perspective. So this is not about choosing colors or anything like that. It's really about the mechanics of themes and styles, why you should use them, how they can benefit you in your development, make it faster, more reliable, more consistent. So I was thinking about this and I thought, all right, well, how do I define what a theme is? And I thought, all right, I could say something like a theme is a collection of styles, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It's like, well, if you didn't know what a style was, you'd say, well, what's a style? And a style is a set of object attributes. But that also doesn't seem all that clear either. So let's look at just a visual example. So if we were to try to describe the theme of this photo in one word, it might be something like corporate. It's blue, which is a lot of financial institutions use blue as their color. There's steel and glass skyscrapers, and it looks like it's taken in a financial district. So we could use, there might be other words as well, but corporate would fit. This one here, we could say maybe pure. It's light, it's airy, it's very minimalist, there's not a lot of contrast. And this last one, we could call it confident. So it's got very high contrast, black and orange that are, contrasting with one another. And, an apex predator, tiger's pretty confident. It's really at the top of the food chain, right? They're a powerful animal. So what I'm getting at is you don't necessarily need words in order to convey ideas to your audience. You can suggest ideas or convey a theme with the choices that you make of which design elements you choose to put on your screen and visual styles. So in our case, we want to do that for an app. And we don't always want to use photography. Maybe we do, but most of the time, perhaps once people are working with this stuff, we're not necessarily using photos. But we still want to convey a look and feel. So we can do that one way is through color. So I've used black and orange here, and I've called this the confident theme to evoke that bold feeling of that tiger. And we still want to adhere to the principles of good UI UX design when we're creating our theme. So let's take a peek behind the scenes and just do a quick overview of layout mode. So at the top, you have your layout tools that you can use to create new objects, so fields, text, button bars, portals, etc. And then you have the Objects tab, and that helps you work with all the objects that are on the layout. And it's in their stacking order. So as you add objects to your layout, they're going to appear at the top of the Objects tab. So this isn't just a list of all the objects. It's actually in which is closest to the front or the top of the screen, the one that's closest to the user, versus the stuff that lower down in the list is further towards the back. So, if something's getting obscured, then, it might be behind some other object. Then there's the right-hand panel, that's the inspector. So there are 4 tabs, which is position, styles, appearance, and data. So right now we're on the appearance tab, but if you're there and you click the styles tab, and then you click show all, then you'll be able to see all of the styles for this theme. So far, so good. So we have our layout, and our layout contains objects. And as you can see, these objects, a lot of them look different from one another, and they look different. Why? Because they have different properties. So you can create styles from these objects, and then once you have an object looking how you like, you can save it as a style. And that's why styles are categorized by object type, because different types of objects have different properties associated with that. So styles really are a way for you to reuse those design decisions that you made that have the look and the feel of all of the objects that you've created and that you want your app to have eventually. So let's take a step back and we're going to look at this from a developer's perspective in terms of the relationships between all of these elements. So at the top, you have your file. And I'm going to use an ERD diagram for those of us who are familiar with it. And inside your file, you have many layouts, right? And right now, you can't reuse your layout in any other file. Inside the layout, you have a bunch of layout objects. That makes sense so far. And then according to the layout object, you have a bunch of generically object properties. So then you also, besides your layouts, you also inside the file have your theme. And the file can have a number of different themes in it. And that theme can have a number of different styles. And again, the style, just like the layout object, can have a bunch of object properties. The theme is can be attached to many different layouts, but each layout can only have one theme. And same thing with the styles. You can have many different objects that share the same style, but each object can only have one style at a time. So once you have the style, you can apply it to many different objects. So that's basically your the advantage of having a style, right? Is you can save all those decisions and then use it over and over. So let's look at this, an example kind of in detail, just focusing on one object. So you've got your file. Inside your file, you've got your layout and your layout objects. Then you have your theme and your style that's inside the theme. And let's just look at a single layout object and the button bar, for example, okay? So the button bar, let's pretend it has 3 segments, doesn't matter, just 1, 2, 3. And if we zoom in and look at a single button, now we have actually a state, right? So when we're actually working with these objects, a button bar can be in a different state. And the state of the button is a dynamic description of the button's current condition based on interaction with the user. What is the user doing with it right now? So if it's doing nothing, it could just be in inactive state, it's just sitting there on the layout. But maybe if they hover over it with the mouse, we want it to change color. And we want it to give the clue to the user that this is something they can click on, right? So you can set your attributes, the same attributes for the same object, but in different states. And we have 5 states: active, inactive, hover, press, and focus. Let's just look for a second at the active state. So we're looking at the active state for this button bar segment, and there are different element properties that you can set. So I'm sorry, the fill type, the border type, and the font family, just as an example, we'll just take those 3. There's other ones, but we can do that. So if we just choose the fill type, you have a bunch of options. You can do none, solid, gradient, or image. Let's take the gradient just for fun because it's the most complex one. So you've got a from and starting and ending color, from and to. You've got a gradient type, is it linear or radial, and an angle, whatever the angle happens to be, okay? So what's the point of this? What I want to convey to you is that we're looking at one property of one segment of one object in one state. So you can think about the fact this object has 4 other possible states. This is just one object on your layout, and you can multiply this one object. You have a bunch of objects on your layout, a bunch of layouts in your solution. That's a lot of data, right? That's a lot of data in the background that can be held. So you want to use your styles because that really compresses the amount of data that's actually being loaded when you draw the layout. So if you didn't have styles, then all of this information is stored at the object level. And that can be a real drain depending on how much formatting that you have that isn't styled information. So let's zoom back out. And let's say you have your button. And once you assign a style to the button object, FileMaker is going to refer to the style information to determine how that object should look, okay? And it's only going to load that information for the style one time. And then once you assign the style, then FileMaker is going to refer to the style for the information for the fill type, border type, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have all your styles, then you can do styles for many different kinds of objects. And then you save all of those styles up to the theme. So to sum up, a style is a named set of properties describing how the object should be displayed on the UI. And essentially, it's a set of decisions that you have made about how you want the object to look, and then you can save it and use it again and again. So let's talk a bit about some technical details about the theme. There's not much to the theme, really. It's just mainly at heart, it's a container for all of the styles. So it's a collection of styles that are used to create that specific look and feel. You can't actually have a file that doesn't have a theme. It's not allowed. And you can see how many layouts are using a given theme. You can go up to the manage layouts, manage themes, and that'll bring up the manage themes dialog box. And if you see there, you can see, all right, confident is there's 31 layouts. Fortunately, you can't get a lot more information than this about the styles. You'll have to use an analysis tool as Base Elements or Inspector Pro if you want to really delve deeply into which objects are using which styles. But you can see how many layouts you have. So if you wanted to eliminate a theme, for example, you could go and take it out of those layouts, make sure it says 0 there, and then you can safely delete it as long as you still have one theme left in your file. You can also import a theme into another file. So if you have a big multi-file solution, you can designate one file as your master that's going to be for your theme, and then you can import that into other files. And you can either have a separate file, or you can just, what I do is I don't actually have a separate file, I just have one that's the central one that is going to take all of the changes to the theme, and then you can distribute it to the others. You can also, that's how you import it. Just click on the import button there on the Manage Themes dialog. So each theme comes with default styles for every object. So if you look at the minimalist theme, it has actually no other styles. So if you're looking to create something from scratch, it's a good one to use because there's not a lot of stuff there that's already there that you have to kind of remove and start over with. So if you want to just start from the ground up, minimalist is a good one. Most other themes, except for minimalist, will have additional styles. So you already saw these earlier. You go into layout mode and look at the styles panel and show all, and you can see all the different styles that are there. And the last little thing to know is that you can have a layout that doesn't have a theme. So you have to have a layout. Each layout has to have a theme, and you can see which theme it is by just looking up in that top right corner there. It'll tell you which theme the layout's using. So when we looked at the button bar earlier, we saw that there are a number of levels of data that we can input that's going to influence the appearance of the object, right? So there's about 5 different levels to it. So the first is just the object type. So which type it is. And then you have the object, which object it is. Then you have the object element. So these are all of the parts of the object that can be styled. So if you have like a button bar, for example, there's the actual exterior part of the button bar, there's the segment, there's a divider, there's the icon. So there's different elements of the button bar that can be styled. Then you have the state that we talked about. So, hover or active. Maybe sometimes if it's a nav button, you want it to stay lit up, so to speak. You want it to have a color so that users know where they are. That's the active state. And then you've got the element properties. So, if you're looking at the segment, you can put fill, as we saw earlier. There's a border, there's text, there's all sorts of other types of properties that can be styled for that element. And then last, there's actual values. So the values that you're actually going to specify. So if it's a fill color, for example. So let's just take a quick example looking at this. So here's your button bar object. Then you've got your element, which is the button bar segment. It's going to be in active state. We're going to just choose active there. And then the property is the solid fill color. And then the value, which is going to be a hex code for a particular color. So you can see we can input a lot of data into the object's appearance, but how does FileMaker actually use this style information? How does it, store it? So let's talk about the actual technical part of the styles for a moment. So first of all, styles are all derived from other styles. You can't just like make a style out of nothing. There's going to be already a default style. If you add something to the layout, it's going to inherit the default style, and then you can make another style from it. And you can't use a new style on any other layouts until you save that style to the theme. So what that means is that there are layout level styles. When they're created first, that's where they live. And then once you save them to the theme, then they're available elsewhere in the file. So let's take a look at this. If you make a change, let's say you've got an object and you make a change to it that's different from what the attributes are in the style itself, you're going to get this little red icon next to the style name. And that's just telling you that something about this object on the layout looks different from its assigned style. And what we call that local formatting. And that's information, that's extra information. So the style is still going to get loaded, but anything extra you add, you're kind of manually overriding the style, right? So that is going to also get stored and also get loaded. So if you go ahead and actually if you click that pop-up menu, you'll see there's a few different options. You can save the changes to the current style, new style, rename it, revert changes, or delete it. If you delete it, it'll revert to the default style for that object type. But we're going to save changes to the current style. Then you'll see that the icon next to the theme name is going to get a red icon. And that's telling us that there's styles that have been saved to this layout that have not been yet saved up to the theme, right? So I really recommend that you save these changes as you go, because it's going to quickly get out of hand if you've got a bunch of layouts that have unsaved style changes, and it could be the same style with different properties in different layouts, and then somebody goes and saves it and all of the objects with that style change. So just do yourself a favor, and as I said before, unless you have a third-party analysis tool, you actually don't necessarily know which object it is. So it's just easier to just do it as you go, right, and save it and make sure that it's saved to the theme. So just save changes to the theme, that's the easiest part. So behind the scenes, all of these styles are saved as CSS. And you can look at the CSS for the file, and you can go up to Tools and Save a Copy as XML. You'll see the screenshot here, that's where I took that from. And you'll be able to see what CSS is actually attached to your file. And if you do any local formatting, you'll see that'll come up as local CSS. And that results when you change the property of the object on the layout, but you don't save it to the style. And that's local formatting. So it overrides the object's assigned style, and it adds additional CSS to that object. So it's a bit like, you ever have pancake syrup as opposed to real maple syrup? They're not the same. I was visiting my friends Evelyn and Giulio, met from Guru in Italy. And I said to them before I came, I said, is there anything you want from Canada? And of course they said maple syrup. So I brought them some, and they showed me what they were using. And it was like from New Brunswick, it was a Canadian product. It was 10% maple syrup, and then a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
That a bunch of other stuff is your local formatting. Right? So you want to use the real stuff. So what I did is I created a simple file, just a brand new file. I just put one object on it, which is a button bar, and I made one change to it, and which created local CSS, and then I did save as XML, and it was 308 lines. Okay, so not bad, but don't forget this is just a very, very simple file. So I just did the length of the total layout. I didn't do just the local CSS, I just did the whole thing. Then I did the same thing. I saved that change to the style, and then I did the same thing again. About half. So 126 lines down from 300 and something. So that's quite a bit. So just think about how that adds up, local formatting over time, right? I don't know, is anybody familiar with Hansa at 2ForYou? He talks a lot about optimization, right? And he talks about how really small incremental changes can end up really dragging your solution down over time. And when I'm in the kitchen, I try to clean as I go, right? I try to keep it clean. I cook and then I clean up. So at the end of the meal, there's only like a couple pots and pans. And when my husband cooks, however, bless him, he makes a huge mess. You know, some couples are like, well, if you cook, I'll clean. We don't do that in my house. So it just get in the habit of doing it as you go, keeping it clean, and it's just so much easier, right? And you don't have to do a big cleanup at the end. So getting back to styles, we just want to keep the CSS clean and not cluttered, right? So when it comes to drawing the actual layout, FileMaker will cache the style information. And I said when the layout is drawn, but I talked about Buttonhole Play over there yesterday, and he said actually it caches the style information when the file is loaded. The whole theme gets loaded. But then when the layout is drawn, there's no additional drawing or additional CSS because it's already stored at the style level. But if you have CSS that is on the local formatting, then that will get loaded again when the layout gets loaded. So if it's a lot, then it can really affect the performance. So when you have the same style and the objects are all using the same style, then they use that cache style information instead, and that will help your performance. And as I just said, if you use local formatting, then it's going to increase your load time. So when you use the styles, it really can improve your performance, particularly if you have a lot of local formatting. A little bit here and there is probably not going to make a huge difference, but if you're really not in the habit of using styles at all, then it can really be significant. I've heard of some solutions really, really getting dragged down, and some solutions just have like so many objects on them. It's unbelievable. Sometimes the object panel won't even load because there's so much, right? So that's my pitch for using styles if you're not already. So if styles are so great, why don't we use them more? I've seen this. I worked with developer teams, and sometimes people just don't use them. And I found there's a few common reasons that people kind of tell me or that I figure out. The first is, they don't know why styles are important, and to paraphrase the immortal Socrates, you don't know what you don't know. I'm sure that he probably said it more elegantly than that, but the idea is sound. If you don't know why you should use them, then you're probably not going to use them, right? So I've talked a little bit already about why to use them. Obviously, first is performance. So they reduce the amount of CSS required. And the second is consistency. So consistency is a major design goal that we have to improve users' experience. So we're talking about consistency from the user side insofar as, the same layouts will look, or similar layouts will look similar across the solution. So we want that sort of look to be consistent, but also from a development perspective, consistency is helpful. Consistency is kind of like having a safety net, right? When the stakes are high, you can count on the fact that you're doing it the same way every time. I don't know, it's like if your mother-in-law calls you up and says, I'm coming to dinner tonight, and you look at your kitchen and it's a disaster, right? Like there's just things everywhere, your cupboard's empty, and you got to run to the store, spend a whole bunch of time cleaning, and kind of you're running around trying to fix the situation, right? Before you can actually get started. But when you do things the same way every time, because you always use styles, you have everything at your fingertips, it's much easier when you're in a crisis to just use the best practice. And so I just try to use the best practice for everything. And I feel like when it comes to styles, people, it's kind of low on the priority list. It kind of just falls to the bottom of the list. But it is important. We're talking about, creating something that makes people go, wow, that's the difference. So it's a bit of your safety net if you're just being consistent all the time from a development perspective and not just from a user's perspective. And also it's more efficient. So deciding on how the object should look, that takes time, right? If you have to then reformat every time you add objects, that takes more time, right? So if a developer can just use the existing style, that's going to make the development go that much faster. They don't have to ask the question, well, what should I use? What should it look like? And then they spend some time fiddling around. And then next time, you don't know what they did. And you're copying something, local formatting from somewhere else, and it just kind of mushrooms. So if we want to create that amazing gourmet meal, it's really about that care and attention to detail. Okay, so the second roadblock. I need a quick fix. I don't have time to fiddle with the styles. There's an old saying that I like. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. we've all had that pledge that we stuck in there, one morning because somebody needed something, and that just became the method that everybody used forever, and you're stuck with it, right? So it's just better if you can to just do it right, or just follow best practices the first time. So, you don't want to prioritize that short-term goal over the long-term sustainability of your solution, because the more objects you create that don't have a style, then the more work it becomes to oppose the style later, the slower and less consistent your layouts become, the longer it takes to make design decisions and fiddle with appearance objects when building new layouts. So I don't know about you, sometimes when I'm super busy, I'll just start eating fast food, and then pretty soon I'm working from bed in my pajamas all day. And then you're you have to spend a couple of weeks recovering, right? So it's better to just plan ahead and, just be more sustainable with it, and establish those best practices and just learn to use them all the time, because that can be your safety net when the stakes are high. All right, so the biggest one, I think, and I've heard this from a number of people that I've talked to this week as well, I don't know how to name the styles. This is a major conundrum for many people. So in the words of the developer, Phil Carlton, there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. And, he's so right. I don't know what else Phil Carlton did, but he's really known for this quip. And, he's still right. Naming things is hard. So first of all, there's that philosophical, problem of what do I call it? What do I name it after? A lot of people name by appearance, and I really don't recommend that, especially, or position, top left green button. Well, what happens when the button moves? What happens if the color changes? And it also doesn't really give any clues, how am I supposed to use a style later? So that's the real, I think, thing that's missing, is giving clues to the developers later on. When you want to reuse the style, they don't go look through the style list and go, oh, I don't see the one I want, I'm just going to create a new one. And then you end up with a bunch of extra styles that are almost identical or even are identical that are useless. So then that defeats the purpose of having the style in the first place, right? So then there's also an issue of making the name long enough to be clear, but you only have 25 characters to do it in. So, and you can't zoom in on the inspector panel, and you can't make it bigger. So you're stuck with 25 characters. So ideally, you have to be able to differentiate the styles from each other in 25 characters or less. Maybe Clay's listening. People have been asking.
25. I don't know who should ask that.
We can zoom out on the object panel. I don't know if you know that. You can actually zoom out on the object panel if you select it and then do the command minus. You'll actually be able to zoom out and see more, but you can't do that on the styles panel. So this is what I suggest, is a component-based approach to naming the styles. And what it means is you start to think about the layout in a different way. So it's not just a collection of objects or random objects. It's really a collection of UI components that are working together. So if you had a search, widget, right? There's a bunch of elements that make up that search widget, but then what it's for. So as we know, style names have to be unique, right? You can't repeat a style name. So what happens when you have a component, you're trying to name by component, but you can't repeat the component name over and over again. Solution to that is to use a 3-letter prefix that corresponds to the object type. So txt if it's text, lin if it's line, and so forth. So then you can use the same component name with different object types. And then that solves that issue. Then I use underscores just because I always use underscores and it makes it easier instead of spaces. Then you have the component name. Now you still have a philosophical problem here of what to name it. Could just be something as simple as portal if you don't have a lot of portal styles. You could also rename them, but then you have to think about the fact that if you're renaming a component, then you have to think about whatever other styles are using that same name, updated in all the places. But try to name it, think about what is the function of this particular component, and then name it after that. And that solves that problem of which style do I use? Well, what kind of component are you making? Then you can add any qualifying attributes. So let's say you have styles and one is, default is left aligned because that's how text is by default. But if you have exactly the same style, but it's right aligned, then you can just, add an R to the end to differentiate them from one another. So in our button bar example, you can see we've just named the button bar nav. Oh, I'm sorry, I went past it. Bar nav main. Simple. Now, a word about abbreviations. I did abbreviate this because nav is like pretty unique. I'm not going to have another object that is similar to nav. So, but I generally like to use whole words if I can, if I have the space, just because it's clearer. But also you have to think about how many characters do I have. So sometimes you have to shorten, but just make sure that it's clear that if you're shortening, you're not compromising the clarity in order for the name to fit. Okay, so here's the portal. So this is the area above the portal, and then which I call the portal header. And this is just the shape. It's just a rectangle that goes behind just to delineate the and anchor the top of the portal. And then I have the text object, which is also shown as this has the same image, txt portal header. And then there's a right aligned version of that text, which is the same, and I just appended _R to the name. Hopefully you can see that. So another tip is it's okay to have a lot of styles. I think people get worried of like, oh, I have so many styles. That's okay. It's like having different spices in your cupboard, right? It enables you to make a richer meal for the people who are going to be eating it. So don't worry about that. And I think it's more than offset by the penalty of having a lot of local formatting. So if you have a proliferation of styles, that's normal, that's fine. Don't be like, well, I better not create a style because then I'll have another style. As long as you're naming it well and you know what it's for, that's probably the best that you can do. And it'll still be faster than using local formatting. There's time for questions later. So let's just sum up. Styles are really a way for you to save all those design decisions you made, save time, and help you create that specific look and feel, and again, consistently. And they help you maintain consistency, as we saw. It's important for both users, also for developers, because that's just, a safety net when you're just being consistent. And of course, styles are going to load more quickly and efficiently than a bunch of local formatting. So if you want to get the best results, please use a naming convention. I've given you one here today. Use them as much as you can. And lastly, you really need to maintain them. Remember when we said save those changes to the theme right away? Make sure you do that so that it doesn't start to drift and get out of whack. And one last tip I want to give you, which is I would resist the temptation to use a style on more than one component type, even if initially they're the same, because then you're sort of defeating the naming convention. So sometimes people would say, well, I've got this portal and now I want to do something else. Maybe portal's a bad example, but let's say a button, and it's going to serve a different function, but it's going to look the same as this other button. So I'm going to use the same style that is shared with this other component. I would say don't do that, because then you're defeating your clarity of your naming convention at that point, right? So, if you have to make a second style and it's the same as the first one, but it's for a totally different component, go ahead and do that. And you're giving up a little bit of time or processing speed to an extra style, but you're adding clarity. So in my opinion, I would go for the clarity, because in the long run, that'll be more important. So if you want to see exactly how I did this, you can purchase this, of course. I left some cards at the side if you want to take one, but there's also a QR code at the end if you want to take a look at it. So I hope you've been inspired to start using styles if you haven't been already. And if you are using them, I hope you still learned something useful today. Because as I said, styles are like having all the different spices in your kitchen. And that's how you can make richness and bring a really beautiful experience to your users, and then it can help elevate your app. So thank you very much. So just before I take questions, I'll just put this up here. I have a few free resources on my website. UI design checklist, which gives you some things to check out in 10 different aspects of your UI. Design cheat sheet that goes over the do's and don'ts of 9 important visual design concepts. And then there's also a workflow design reading list, which is I recommend in my course. And this is a list of like 12 or so books that I found most important. I've read a lot more than 12 books, believe me, on design. But if you really want to learn about design, and of course, FileMaker design is a very specific little corner, and most of the books we have are about web design, but there's lots and lots of overlap. So you can check those books out. That's going to really help you. And this is the QR code for the resources, for the free resources. If you want to take a photo, I'll give you a second to do that. And then also, I have a Facebook group as well. You get FileMaker UI UX Design Facebook group, so you can join the Facebook group as well. Okay, I think there's some questions. Clay has the mic.
Oh, thank you, Clay. I have 2 questions, but just one comment first. When you're saving a style, if you happen to be like me and you're handicapped, you can't see the color red. There's an asterisk that pops up beside
You're right, yes.
the name of the style and the
That's
theme.
a really good point. I'll just comment. So it's kind of dangerous to rely on color alone to differentiate important data. Because as the gentleman just pointed out, some people cannot see the color red. And if it's the same value as the regular icon, it will be missed. So the important point is there's also an asterisk there as well that will say, oh, there's an unsafe change. So yeah, good call.
You can tell who we are. We're the people who don't get our socks colored correctly when we get dressed.
It's actually, about 8% of European males suffer from a color deficiency of some kind.
Yeah, it's called red-green, and men have it more than women do.
Is your mic working?
I guess not. What do I have to do? Oh, okay. Now?
No.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure. We probably should be on the mic.
How about now?
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, good. So 2 questions, and you in order. Is there a list of things that do not behave properly in WebDirect? And likewise, is there a list of attributes that are not saved to the style? For example, I think padding
Yes.
is saved, but indenting is not, or something like that.
Yeah, so some of the text things like padding and, padding is, but tabs and indent, those are kind of object level. So yes, there's it's a little bit, quixotic of what you kind of have to sort of sift through. I think WebDirect, if I recall correctly, Goya had something on their website of watchouts. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yes, in WebDirect at the moment, click-through isn't supported. So if you put like text on a button, you won't be able to access the button behind, those sorts of things. So yeah, there's a few things. You can kind of dig around for those online.
Check boxes and radio buttons, just ignore whatever formatting you've given them.
Yep.
Yeah, the battery's dying on the mic, so
Okay.
just point it out to whoever you want.
All right.
So my biggest question really is about, are there any tools for making like universal changes to the theme, maybe directly to the XML? Because use cases that I have a template file and a template theme, when I build a new app, I often like to change the colors to match the company's colors, but then I have to go through every single object. And where you were talking about, it's okay to have so many objects, but if I do that, now I've got that many more objects that I've got to manually go through and change each and every one.
well, if you have a style, you should only need to change the style information, not the objects itself, ideally. But so the question was, are there any tools that can help you make global changes, say, to a color? And the answer is yes. I personally haven't used them because I always do new designs for people, but I do know of some. If you look out there, and I don't remember off the top of my head who has them, but there is something that you can do through the XML to change. You can say search for a particular hex code and say, well, every time I have this hex code, replace it with a different one. So the answer is yes. I'm sure if you do a quick search, you'll be able to find them. Someone,
Can you
yes?
just go back one slide so we get that previous?
The UI design, is that what you wanted?
I thought you had another QR code over the report out.
This is, oh, sorry, before the resources.
Yes, that one.
Okay, yeah. Someone else?
So I am Mr. Styles. I'm with you. I love using styles. I have, say, a field that is left justified. And that's my default, like 12-point Arial. I choose that, and that's what everything is. But then once in a while, I want that field to be right justified. So I just go Command Shift, right, and it's got a red dot on there, and I just move on. Would you suggest that I say, no, you gotta make a right justified style because it's gonna make the CSS faster, or just say, yeah, one little change, don't worry about it, like what?
So the question is, if you have a very similar style, or sorry, an object, and it's left justified and you want to make an instance of it that's the same thing but right justified, do you create a new style or not? So it's a bit of a toss-up. I think really it comes down to, are you going to use that right justified one more than once or twice? Then I would say yes, because a lot of times you're going to reuse that right justified in a lot of different places, right? You're going to have like in the portal example I showed, I've got a lot of portals in my solution. I'm probably going to need that right justified text. If it's a true one-off, then don't worry about it. If it's really literally one time, but I don't know. It is.
Because I'm worried
You don't
about
always
getting
know.
my style list just way too cluttered. Now I'm just like scrolling through the thing,
Well, what I typically do is I almost always copy and paste my objects from somewhere else. So I start with a layout that's similar to there's very rarely, especially once you've built the solution, are you creating brand new stuff. You're usually taking what you have and modifying it in some way. And so their styles are already attached to that object, and there's a lot less of that searching.
No.
So note for Clay, we would like to be able to search the styles panel by
Hitting the top.
Poor Clay, he's really like regretting showing up today.
I have two questions. Can I ask?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So one of my issues is like, okay, you've got your lion, what did you call it, jungle theme? Let's call it.
Tiger, yeah,
Tiger
confident,
theme.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so you've made a solution with that and you like it, and then you say, okay, I'm making a solution for another client using that, making it for a third client, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then in the third client, I actually add a couple of things, which are like really cool. And then the first client now wants a change, and I realize, oh, hey, and I now want to get that lion theme back into the first file, but when I import it, it comes in as a new theme. So now I got to go to every single layout and change all the layouts to the new theme because I want this new kind of.
I think you can update a theme.
Okay, how do you do that? Because I haven't figured that out. You have to go into the.
No, I think it's
CSS and
import.
copy and
No,
paste it?
it's import. And I think it checks though, but I believe that it does it through the UUID and not necessarily the name. So the styles will match. So the problem you'll have is if you manually created styles in the other theme that aren't in the original one. That's why you kind of have to have one that's the master, and then you're only adding stuff there and populating
Well,
it
I'm
down
only
to the
adding like a
others.
new object, that hadn't been in there before. It's just like a new idea
Yeah, so you can re-import
and replace.
and replace, as long as,
I haven't-
so the problem you'll run into is if you have two themes that have the same name or are exist in one and not the other, then you might have, just like if you did data, right? And you had like a data source that you were trying to bring in data and matching, the stuff that doesn't match is gonna cause you trouble. Sorry, I have a bunch of other questions. Yes.
So when you're designing layouts, are you using dynamic, what are they called? Dynamic guides, or are you using a grid-based layout?
I typically use the position tool a lot. The thing with the grid is, I know people love it, and I have nothing against it, but the problem I have with it is sometimes the screen sizes don't fit neatly into the grid necessarily, right? So depending on what size of screen you're designing for. And so then you're trying to measure things, you want things to be even, let's say the gutters on the left and right, and it doesn't necessarily line up on the grid because you want to have, let's say, 10 points on one side, 10 points on the other, and then the measurements are all kind of weird. So I use the position and I just pick a base, like let's say base 10, or use 5 as your kind of smallest unit, or 6, like 6 and 12 works really well. Whatever it is, you can pick that and use it, and then I also make sure my objects are kind of standard sizes so that the object height can provide padding between objects as well. It makes it a little bit easier to align them as well.
Okay.
Yes, Stephen.
The thing that really got me off guard was I had date field, it was all styled and ready to go. And then I turned on the calendar icon and
Yes.
it was a totally different style. It was caught me off guard.
Yeah, so Asia was just saying that if you change like the date and then you put the calendar in, it's like technically a different kind of object with a different style. And so you have to watch out. Yeah, so the pop-up I think is like that. Drop down to pop-up, those sorts of things.
Arrow says for pop-up or drop down. If it's show arrow, it's a different style than if you don't show the arrow.
Yes,
So you
yes.
can find two different styles. But it'll over.
So one of the things I'm planning, so if this theme is useful to you, please buy it. But also, if people find it useful, I'll make more. I have plans to make a lot more of them, and I also have planned out an actual, everything you need to know about themes as a little mini course ready too. So if people are interested in that, please let me know if that's something you'd like me to make. I'm here seeing a couple of nods. So then we can kind of document all those little gotchas there, right? Those kinds of things. Yes.
The one bug that's in the WebDirect that hasn't been noted is there is one where you'll style a text box item, or it's actually I think it might be a button bar object left justified, but when you see it in WebDirect, it's actually centered.
Yes. So some of the text formatting doesn't go across to WebDirect, and sometimes also the baseline can shift too. It looks aligned in FileMaker, and then it looks a bit. So you kind of have to figure out, well, what can I live with that looks okay on both places?
Well, and the fix to it is actually to have a local style.
As to which? Local styling, I see.
So you just simply, it's assigned to a regular style defined, but then you just make one attribute change to it it's non-consequential to what you're doing, and it actually then goes back to left justified.
But that's interesting. The other thing as well is I noticed there's a difference if you have so for line height, if you have just like one line versus if you change it to points, there's like a slight difference between those things, and like it'll look different on Windows and Mac if it's set to just a line, but if you specify a point size, then it
A lot
looks
of
the
that has to
same.
do with the font render.
Yeah, so let's not be too hard on FileMaker here. This stuff is kind of complicated, right? Font management across different platforms, that's kind of really, it's a tough thing, so.
Figured out, so it's not a problem.
Yeah. There are definitely some gotchas with that, but I love WebDirect, by the way. So.
But the one question I did actually have was just when you're defining a new style, do you find it helpful to start with a style sheet, just like an empty layout that you've kind of put some basic objects onto to kind of have a starting point? And then as you're working, you can reference back to the style point or
Well, that's an interesting question. The question is do I start with a base set of things and then work from there, or do I start with a blank layout and go up? It kind of depends. Like if I'm working on an existing solution, I'll almost always start with an existing layout because we want it to coordinate and look consistent, and then I'll just modify what's there. Most of the time I will do a mock-up in Adobe XD or some other, you can use there's a bunch of different Figma, but we'll do, or even if it's low fidelity, you can use Balsamic as a low fidelity mock-up. So you have a reference of, Balsamic is just going to tell you what your objects are and where roughly they go. But if you do a mock-up that's more closer to what your final product is going to look like, and in fact, you can make it look exactly how you want pixel for pixel, then you have already something that you're going by, and then you're creating your styles from there. So in the beginning, it's a bit hard because you're spending a lot of time changing things. And also I experiment. I'll be like, do I like this? Does this look good? Oh, I thought this was going to, I don't know, like on the hover, maybe you're not going to put all of that information into the mock-up of all of the different button states, and you're going to kind of do that work once you get to FileMaker. So it kind of varies. I prefer probably to start with nothing and work my way up if I'm starting just brand new, because then I have less that I have to worry about cleaning out if I'm starting from scratch. Any other questions? Yes.
Earlier, you had a CSS file pulled up. Is that what that was?
Yes.
Are you able to edit that actual CSS file and say use like variables for colors? Is that
I don't think you can use variables for colors, but you can. There are some some products we were talking about earlier that can modify the XML for you. Now, I personally haven't done it, so I think you probably need to talk to somebody who's more experienced with that than I am about the XML, messing with it. But my understanding is that yes, you can, for example, change a color. I don't think you can insert dynamic data into it that it will just pull from somewhere else unless you did some fancy footwork.
It's not using a web browser's CSS processing code, so the code that's inside FileMaker is a subset of what all CSS can do. So
yeah,
you can rearrange and do everything that you can see in there currently, but adding in higher level features of future versions of CSS will be.
Yeah, basically FileMaker, from my understanding, is kind of piggybacking and using CSS because it's already an established language and it has everything that you could possibly want, but it's not necessarily, got the whole scope of everything that CSS could do. Yes.
Alexis, I discovered that Adobe has dropped support for PostScript fonts in their latest edition of Illustrator, and OpenType and TrueType are still okay. So that may be something to look out for in the future if PostScript is going away gradually.
Yeah, I mean, people have been asking in terms of fonts. People have been asking for a greater font set that will absolutely work cross-platform. FileMaker does not store the fonts inside of FileMaker. It uses the fonts that are installed on the system.
Right.
So the good part of that is if you've got somebody, let's say everyone has Word installed, right? You can assume that they probably have a font that isn't one of the standard ones. Unfortunately, our list of absolutely rock solid fonts is there's about 6.
It used to be that
in every case.
Tahoma
What's
was
that?
the one that had the identical metrics in both Windows and Macintosh.
Yeah, Tahoma, actually Arial, I believe as well. And the other thing you can do is if you have a non-standard font, but it has a similar width to one of the standard fonts, that way, if they don't have the font, it'll get substituted. So for example, if you use Open Sans, or if it's thinner, so Open Sans I believe is a little thinner. On Chrome, if you use WebDirect, it'll give you Open Sans because it's a Google font. If you go on Safari, you just get Helvetica. But it's okay because there's not the problem when you change fonts radically is the amount of space that you've allocated for field data or for labels suddenly is the wrong size. So the bigger issue is if it grows and you haven't left enough space. If it shrinks, then that's less of a problem, right? So, but the safest thing to do is just to stick to the very small list of fonts, Clay. Yes.
I was curious about how you handle these native default fields for the object types. Every style, every theme will come with that, and
I ignore the default.
Yeah, my tendency is to just say never use them on a layout because we have this sort of quality of globally inheriting some CSS to anything.
Yes. So the question is about that default style. Should you use it? I actually end up not using it, and the reason is if you change the default style, every style that was based on that default style will also change. It kind of has an override. So let's say the default style is Helvetica and you change it to Courier. All of the styles that you use that were Helvetica derived from that font will change to Courier as well. So it's kind of dangerous. So I tend not to use that default, and figuring out what the default should be is sometimes tricky. Which font is the default? Is the default a certain type of field or whatever? So I end up tending not to use it because it can be a bit unexpected if you make a change to it and then suddenly all of your styles suddenly change. Oops.
Yeah. I mean, I've some developers that are like, can you just make the default be the way you want it? And then when I drag something on my layout, then I don't need to worry about it ever. But I've always told them just pick the actual style and I'll.
Yeah, I think that works only for the simplest case. Yeah. A lot of times there's not really a default, right? There's something, there's padding added or I don't know. And it just makes it harder. So it's personal preference. I don't think there's hard, fast rules about this. I personally kind of avoid the default altogether. Did I see another question? I'll just ask.
I was going to ask, in the case of company rebranding and you were tasked to reskin their system, is there any advice that you would give to the developers?
Well, I think we talked about already the color change, a global color change tool. I actually haven't been through that too much in terms of people drastically changing their color scheme. So I think it depends what kind of redesign is required. So it might be, if the system's been around for a long time, it might be an opportunity to do like a deeper redesign rather than just reskinning. So, you might have that opportunity to actually build in something better than what you had before. I've never had a company that is using like a modern solution and then suddenly they need to change the colors. That's fairly unusual because a lot of FileMaker solutions are around for a long time. And so by the time they're rebranding, it's been a while and maybe you can actually do something newer altogether. But if you're looking for just changing, there's technical tools you can use to just sort of change things globally. The style, of course, if you want to just change the styles themselves, then you can go through and, goes one style at a time. I personally have never had to do that. So I feel sorry for you if you have to. I would try to say, why don't we take this opportunity to refresh the whole thing, not just change some colors. Was there other questions? Yes. Oh, over here. Sorry, you haven't come back to.
Thanks. Two questions about your approach to naming and kind of management of a large collection of styles based on two sanity check questions. Number one, is there or is there not inheritance and properties cascade? It seems like start with a standard style and make one that's derivative of that there is inheritance.
But only from the standard one.
So there is and both is not.
Correct.
Depending on what you do.
Yes.
And so, question one about naming, you never mess with that, so you don't have any reference to whether or not there's inheritance in your name. I wanted to have inheritance, I wanted to be able to change certain attributes across multiple styles over one. Could do that by basing it on a standard style, by basing my styles starting style.
Yeah, so there were questions about inheritance, like what gets inherited down to the child styles and what doesn't. So the default style will push its attributes to any child styles that were created from it. But if you create something from one of the child styles, then it isn't. So it's a bit confusing. So yes, if you wanted to, for sure, always use your default style as your base, and then only configure child styles from the default style. And then you could then, be sure that if you change the font, for example, it would change everywhere. But the problem is, I think, with transparency, it's just not clear which are children and which aren't. And so often you have an object that already has, it's fairly complicated, it's already styled, and you just want to change one thing, and then you're changing a child style that isn't from the default. So I just err on the side of I don't use the default, so I don't have to worry about it, and they're all kind of independent.